Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Judy Brooks Conversations. The League of Women Voters of Amherst wants you to participate in conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the series has a wide variety of topics and wonderful, interesting, exciting people, many in our own community, like tonight. And we really encourage you to write down or, ask questions at the end of the talk. If anything you'd like to know more, because we have a real expert on town government. And this series was named after Judy Harris Brooks, who will long be remembered as an educator and civic leader, and was very involved in the League of Women Voters, and she was very interested in solving problems and complex issues in our community, which was her community. And she is very much missed. And we just lost her husband recently also. So we have good memories and a lot of good stuff that came from them. Anyway, I would like to introduce Jennifer Moyston, who grew up in Amherst and actually is now still here. He's come back to be in Amherst and has been working for the town for 10 and a half years, okay? And she is the Assistant Director of DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. And she's a Community Participation Officer. She's the board president of the Amherst Survival Center, and a board member of what is it called? Something of the Pioneer Valley. I missed the other part.
Community Action of Pioneer Valley.
Committee Action, okay, of Pioneer Valley, and a board member of the Hilltown Community Health Center, as well as a parent/guardian association member of the Amherst Regional High School. And Jennifer's going to talk to us about local government in different aspects. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Jennifer.
Hi, everyone, and thank you. It's an honor to be here. I see so many of my favorite faces, so that's a wonderful thing. I would also like to say that as opposed to like me kind of lecturing, if there are questions or comments, please raise your hand or just ask your question or comment so that we're really just having a conversation versus I do enough like presentation style stuff, so I rather have it be more open. Yeah, and so I guess I'm going to go over a lot of things. So as Andrea said, I grew up here, and there are two things that really stick with me about growing up here in Amherst. One is I grew up in Village Park, which was the definition of community to me. So it was like it takes a village to raise a child, and all of us kids played together and grew up together, and they all became kind of cousins to us, so each other. And so that was really beautiful. And if you got in trouble up the house at Letitia's house up the hill, like there were like three moms popping out the window talking about, I see you were up there causing trouble. And everybody kind of, we always wondered how they knew. Maybe it was just our walk, but the walk of shame back down the hill to your house. But they somehow knew. And so I think that when it comes to my work with diversity, equity, inclusion, growing up in Village Park had a large part to do with that, because it was so diverse. I mean, there were just, and I've said this lots of times, there were families with a mom and a dad. There were families with two moms. There were families with a black mom or dad and a white mom or dad, or, it was just diverse. And so that diversity never really made any difference to us because we all still just played together at the end of the day. So, and it also has fostered in me like community. So I think one of the neater things is when I got older and had my first son, I moved back into Village Park and kind of created or fostered that same environment that I grew up with some of the surrounding people. And so one of the, I was going to call her a girl, but now young ladies, that was her mom and I were really good friends, called me up one day and said, I'm doing a podcast on community and I would love for you to speak, because I remember like, eating dinner at your house, or you doing my hair, or this and that. And so it just really fostered community for me, and which is probably part of the reason why I'm so community minded. So most of the boards, or all of the boards that I sit on now, I've had some type of relationship. Most of them have helped me at some point in my life. Um, and I think for community action in Pioneer Valley, I wasn't, it was, what was it? It was um, HCAC before. So Hampshire County Action Committee, or Hampshire, I don't even remember the name, I'm so sorry, but HCAC was it, and I was an employee there. So and at the same time I received the services, so it's just kind of full circle. So I sit on the boards that have impacted me and have helped me out through my life as a way to give back. I kind of view working for the town as the same way. So as a kid, we had like this sense of pride in the town of Amherst that was just remarkable. So I've said this plenty of times too. Like, we would go roller skating and we'd be like, "Oh, where are you guys from?" And they'd be like, "Well, we're from East Hampton." And we would just be like, "Oh, we're from Amherst." Like, we're just, that's us, right? And or we could lose at a basketball game by like 30 points and walk out the gym with our heads held high, like we're from Amherst. Like, it's just a basketball game. We got this, right? Like, so there was like this immense amount of pride growing up in Amherst. And then, I had a few incidences as an adult going into town hall that kind of like changed the way I felt about it. And then at some point in my life, randomly, I just applied for a position there, and I think there were 100 applicants. So the chance of the fact that I got the position was a miracle, because there were 100 applicants. And I definitely didn't think I was going to get the position, because even to this day, the process of hiring at the town is very, very long. And so I just remember feeling a lot of the times like, this can't be my town that I'm working at, right? When I first started working there. So there was like this, it was just a very, the way that things happened. And there was like that hierarchy where everybody, it was just top down, right? And I don't believe in that type of hierarchy. I believe if your employees are happy, then you're happy, and then your stakeholders are even happier, right? And so I kind of wondered, like, how can I change that? And so one of the things about the town right now is, even though we might not realize it, we are going through like a change. There's like an evolution that's happening in local politics, I think, as the world changes. So we have to change as well to kind of mirror that change. And um and I know a lot of people don't necessarily understand how things operate in a town. So I'm kind of hoping that I can shed some light on that. There's not a lot that I can shed, because local government is, if you ever think about that emoji where people are going like this, right? So it's kind of like, that's what the public is reacting to. It's like that's how they're looking at us. And we're kind of like, I don't know. That's just how it works. We can't explain it. And so there's like this unexplainable thing that you can't explain to people who are outside of the action. You have to like work for the town to really understand how it operates. You just can't explain it. And even with that being said, it doesn't mean that change can't happen, and it doesn't mean that that's the right way. But a lot of times when people are thinking that there's not transparency, it's not that we're not trying to be transparent. It's just the way that the processes are. And so I would also say, to that matter, that those are one of the things that need to change. And what's really nice about being in the DEI office is it gives me the ability to make some of those changes. Although without having a complete equity audit, it's a little bit hard to um, do it for each department. And so at the last workshop that I gave for the town hall staff and the Amherst Recreation Department, you know, I explained to them, like, what you guys really need to do is take the information that I've just given you. And then when you guys go back to work, and as you're dealing with different people, and see where there is what's not equitable, right? Like, because the whole idea of the workshop was to open their eyes up to what was equitable, what is equity, and what is the responsibility of the town when it comes to equity in local government. And so, because there's so many policies and procedures, and they're also different depending on the department, really, it's something that has to be a joint effort. And why DEI can lead, it is really up to the departments at the same time to kind of weed those out as the different policies and procedures come forward to them, right? So I'm just looking at my notes to see what else I have to touch on. Um, and again, it's really, really hard to see the change, but there is change here. And I know that there's lots of folks in the community who are very frustrated with the lack of speed and change, and can't really speak on that. Some things I think could be moving faster, and other things probably need to be slowed down, and some are just right. But I think it was Irv Rhodes who had said to me one day, Jennifer, you can't tell that you're making history when you're in it, right? You just don't know. And so I actually really kind of, that has resonated with me and kind of stuck with me, because that's what we're all doing. We're making history. We don't realize it. And it's our little local Amherst history. So, but it's still history. It's our history, right? And um, one of the other things that I talked about with that, with the Amherst, with the town staff, town hall staff, and the Amherst Rec Department, was that we had an event for Latinx Heritage Month, and unfortunately, for some uncertain circumstances, we had to change the location like 3 times, and it just wasn't a good look by the time we were done, right? So it's great feedback and memories for next year, but in the process, that meant we had a lot of food and not a lot of people, right? And so there is a crew of guys that hang outside of the bank center, and they are typically out there drinking and smoking. They don't really bother anybody except for maybe their language as you pass them sometimes. But I went out to them because I know them, because it's a small town, right? And I was just like, hey, why don't you guys come in and get some food? And they were like, oh, well, we don't really, you know, we're all set. And I was like, really? This food is from the Puerto Rican bakery in Springfield. It's not very often that the town can say we've got like this food. And they were like, really? And they kind of got excited, and you saw that light in them. And then they were like, but we don't feel comfortable. And the event was at the Bang Center. So that like broke my heart, because to go in and out of the space at the Bang Center seems to me to be one of the more neutral places that of a town building, right? The police department town hall is very DMV-ish, right? And so it's just kind of like, man, you don't feel comfortable going into the bank center. It's so neutral. And so it took a lot for me to encourage them to come in, and I'm glad that they did. They really kind of felt like we will be judged, which says a lot about how they feel that people feel about them. And when I was doing my workshop for the town hall staff, I used that to kind of be my baseline of how are we being equitable, how are we being welcoming, what needs to change, right? And so we can't necessarily change the people, but we can definitely put up guidelines and barriers for proper behavior, which sometimes it crosses borders in committee meetings. As you know, I've gotten beat up a few times. It's what happens in local government sometimes. And really just to open up, they were glad that they came in, they were happy, they helped clean up, and it was like, but no one should ever feel like that when it comes to your local government, right? Like they should feel welcomed in any space, and so it's really our responsibility to make that happen. The trick is, not everybody wants to sit on a board or committee. Nobody wakes up and says, "I want to be on FinCom," right? Like that's just like not how it works. And so when we look at who's sitting on boards and committees, it's it's hard to get that diverse population, because when people who are on the boards and committees, they tell their network about the things that are going on, and there's a disconnect with the broader community and local government. And how do we close that? Because if you're not connected to somebody, you just don't know, right? Like I, before working for the town, didn't know there was a human rights commission. I didn't know that the town offered all of these things. And when you think about boards and committees, it sounds like a great example of democracy, of like what the United States is supposed to be built off. But it's so imbalanced when it comes to who's represented on these boards and committees. And that's the piece that has to change. And how do we engage people when they don't feel like they even belong? And so there's that piece of it that there's also a trust issue, and so it's like, how do we resolve that? And I know we do a lot of outreach. Sorry, I have someone looking at me like, and so how do we get people involved even if they don't want to be on a board and committee? How do we still get them to understand what's going on? How do we get them to understand how important it is for them to come out and vote in their local elections, right? And so one of those same kids that gentlemen, sorry, they're not kids, at the bank center that hang out at the bank center asked me on voting day, he was like, "Oh, can I just go into the bank center and vote? Like I'm registered." And I was like, "No, you got to go to your district." And he was like, "My district? No, but I'm already registered." And it was like a whole process that I had to explain to him. And it's like, okay, so first of all, if you're registered, somebody should have kind of tried to walk you through that process, right? So maybe when people are being registered in the information that they're registering or when they go to the clerk's office, the right information isn't being provided. So those are like little things that we need to look at, things that just seem so normal to us that aren't normal to everybody else. So there's a sense of needing to open things up into a broader way. Like really you could call it being cultural competent or having cultural humility. Like our way is not the way that everybody else perceives it. And so getting I mean, I understand that, but getting everybody else on board is a different thing because to them it looks like they're already doing the best job. And I'm not saying that they're not, but there's always room for improvement. And so one thing I do find in local government is that the ego is very serious in local government, right? Like it's very hard sometimes to get people to understand that things move in different ways outside of our own. And that takes a lot of time and that's kind of hard. So diversifying boards and committees is a start, but there has to be other ways that we want to have that people can be involved in local government. So one of the things, since I do all these events, is pulling in more community members to help plan the events, right? So that they feel more included. Because one of the things that I am told often is that there is like when we had our first Latinx or our first Lunar New Year celebration, people really felt like were coming the comments that I received were I'm getting distracted by children, sorry. The comments that I was receiving were, "This is the first time we feel valued, heard, and seen through the town," right? And so it just shows that they want more of that, and how can we include them? The other thing that we're trying to work on through the DEI office is translation services, which was a big push from the Community Safety Working Group. So the CSSJC had two forums recently, and they were translate. There was interpretation services for Spanish, Portuguese, and Mandarin, and that was wonderful. In the in person, there wasn't anyone there to utilize those, and to me, it doesn't really make a difference because how do you explain to somebody that it's available if they don't know it's there, right? And then you can't bank on them saying, I need translation in order. They won't come if they feel like they have to ask for it, right? Because that's another way of being exclusive. So we're trying really hard and we're kind of in the first phase of having translation services available. So there are a couple of resident oversight board forums that are coming up, which is another recommendation from the Community Safety Working Group regarding an oversight board for the police department. And the first two will be translated in Spanish and Portuguese, in Spanish and Mandarin. So it's another opportunity and it's very exciting, and I do hope that it picks up a little bit, or, even one or two people for me would be fantastic, right? Just one or two people, don't need a lot. But and then also it's like little things like we were creating a survey and I was like, well, wait, we can't translate the flyer in Spanish and then have the survey in English. So really it has to follow the whole entire process, which becomes costly, which understandably the town starts to feel kind of way, but we have to run that its course as long as we can in order for people to realize that it's there. And so I was very excited and very proud to have been able to announce the translation. So UMass Translate, and their little slogan is "Translate to Educate." Gotta love that, right? Did a fantastic job, and they're a great group of folks over there. So it's been really nice working with them so far. And I guess I guess we'll just stop for a second to see if anybody has any questions or comments.
Does anybody have questions? Because
I'd like to make a comment.
Okay, go on, Adrian.
Yes, I'm hunting for my hand raised sign. Thank you, Andrea. Jennifer, I'd like to start my comments by a huge thank you. I think when you came to the town offices, you opened up an entire new world for all of us. I can't tell you how proud I am of your accomplishments, both personally and professionally. But having said that, let me add that you and the other CPOs have done an incredible amount of outreach. And I'm not one to suggest additional outreach, but I was wondering, since you really are at the stages, perhaps the initial stages still of a real grassroots operation to institutionalize DEI, among all of the events that you do, have you considered doing an open house? And by this, I mean town hall is perhaps one of the last places a newcomer to town would venture, unless we are among the majority population who've had the experiences prior to coming to Amherst, soon to be, by the way, the minority. But I'm thinking of a way, because town hall does represent by its very architecture and the auspiciousness of what takes place there, as well as the mystery of what goes on in town hall, that perhaps an open house for town hall, among all the other things you've considered and you do successfully. How you do it, I will not suggest, but town hall is the very center of our community when it comes to seeking things to be done, questions to be asked, including what you say and dear to the heart of all the league members, how to vote, when to vote, where to vote. So I just throw that out there to you and say, keep it going, Jennifer, because you really are at the beginning of a very exciting opening up of our town to really be a community.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Adrian. That is so kind for your kind words. I think that an open house is a fantastic idea. And I think the most important piece of that is the outreach that happens from there, because otherwise, as much as I love our usual suspects, we just sometimes just get the same usual suspects at things. And it's not that we don't want them, because we need their voices too. But just like those gentlemen that were hanging out, that hang out at the bank center, they're the ones that are most affected by every policy and procedure that we put forth, right? Because
Yes.
they're not notified necessarily, they don't know, they're not connected. And, and yeah, so they're just, those are the folks who I want to get to, because I feel like that is who I represent, that's who I represent, because that's, for so long I was there. I was just this community member, and I think about why I didn't participate in local government before. And I think most of it was like, I don't know. I was a single mom with 3 boys. If I wasn't working, I was cooking dinner, right? And one of the things that's so nice is the Zoom feature now, is that we do receive more participation via Zoom than we've seen in prior years in in-person meetings. So that's very helpful. And I hope that there's a way that the town can move forward with all of the meetings becoming hybrid as we transition back to in-person, because I will say on the flip side of it is there's something being missed when new boards and committees are formed, or, like for the Human Rights Commission, there's just most of the members on there are new. And so having them meet in person is a beautiful thing, so that they can really get to kind of know each other. And just to say, because I sit on so many other boards and committees outside of the town, is that it's amazing how different boards and committees just interact and their responsibilities of what they do and what they govern and don't. And it's been a really interesting. The first thing I have to say is I'm usually the first person to raise their hand to vote on something because I can finally vote. I'm like, yes, I can do it. Because in town meetings, I'm just the staff I don't want to say I'm just the staff liaison, but I'm the staff liaison. So I don't have any votes. So I find a lot of pleasure in, creating a motion or making the motion. So, and Martha?
Yeah, Martha's. Unmute.
Yeah, well, I want to echo what Adrian said, Jennifer. I've been just listening and cheering this whole time when you talk about all the things that you're doing, and again trying to educate the people in the departments of how to see things in a somewhat different way and so on. A couple things regarding the boards and committees. I mean, our group has spent quite a bit of time trying to talk about that and brainstorming, because one of the problems is that boards and committees take so much time. Not only the meetings that are either at dinner time or work time, or, that's hard, or, but then you need preparation as well and so on. And it seems to me that that's a barrier. And I don't know what's the way around it. But I think that, the new emphasis on providing support for childcare, I think that is helpful. Yeah, I know when Alicia came and spoke to our group, she mentioned that, so we wrote a letter of support and so on, and she was the one pushing for it. But it seems that that's one of the challenges in trying to open things up there.
Yeah, and I think most boards meet monthly. Some do meet weekly. The council meets quite often, and they have their subcommittees. So I think that the committee or they're not a board, they're the council, but I find that their meetings are the ones that are the least, that have the most barriers, because they meet so much and for so long. Like, I know we've all tried to sit through an entire town council meeting, which can run till like 11 o'clock at night, but start at 5:30. And that's hard for anyone, right? Like, that's just hard. And I think it's more like, if you can meet monthly and be really productive during that one time that you're meeting during those meeting times, I think that would help. When you think about it's really about how productive you can be within that time frame. And so it would kind of offset the fact that we're meeting monthly and the additional 5 hours that might be needed to work within the board, to be on the board. So there's no way of getting around that. You have to meet at least monthly, because the thing about it is when you meet like every other month, there's a lot that can happen in that time frame, and there's a lot that might need to be discussed. And then you find yourself creating meetings in the middle of when you weren't expecting it, right, under that 48 hours. So but the barriers are real. And so childcare could be like, if we went in person, we could definitely have translation services available. And I think that we could even do childcare if we went back into full person. So and that would just be like hiring, maybe it's a couple of the folks who do after school or summer camp for Amherst Rec to come do some overtime or some additional hours, and have them in another space wherever that meeting is being held. And maybe offer some snacks or dinner, especially at those council meetings, right? Because that's long.
I think Phyllis has her hand up. Phyllis, don't forget to unmute.
I already did. One
Okay.
of the issues is the actual process of getting picked for the board. We have all read about some council members challenging people on the board because either of their opinions, or we've all read that. So I'm wondering, is there any way going the other way, is how to get them appointed to the board with the least divisiveness and the most niceness, if that's a word, but that's
Or
an issue
encouragement.
is,
Yeah.
yes, getting the people on the board, getting them through the town council. Some people don't want to go through that because of that process.
I understand that. For me personally, I still feel like the struggle is getting the folks who want to come to be on a board or committee. But, and so, you know, when I've sat on the interview process for different boards and committees, it seems pretty, for the most part, easy. And I don't know how often it is that, and actually council playing an opposition of a community member that wants to sit on a board, I think speaks more about that scenario in itself and less about the process, because the process should really be that you go to your interview and, you know, it's either there's 5 people who are interviewing or there's 2 people and there's 3 spaces available. And so all 3 should be filled in a pretty quick manner, right? With an easy process. But again, still that layout is getting, we have to change the faces. So like as a board president at the Amherst Survival Center, I'm trying really hard to change. I just call it changing the faces one by one, right? Because you can only do so much. But even if we change the board members to reflect someone different one by one, and when I say different, I don't mean just skin color, I mean social economic, you know, status, your homeowner, renter. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can diversify, but color is of a big one. And because usually that color piece determines, often, not always, some of those social economic and other statuses that people are being judged or looked at through the lens that they're being looked at. Ash, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
thank-
Andrea, that's just the staff
Please.
liaison in me. I'm just going to take over and run the meeting.
Okay. First, oh, thanks so much for this focus and this perspective on community. Not just a word, but a set of relationships. And one of the things you made clear in your story about community growing up and in other contexts is it really depends on relationships. And those are like
Absolutely.
when people care for each other and they know it. And one of the disjuncts is the idea of government up there is kind of like makes all these decisions. But
Yes.
where is the network of relationships? That's what you do so well, actually.
Oh, thank you.
and you almost do it outside of your official, I'm sure, job description. You know what I mean? It's not in the. I mean, and the question is though, as you try to broaden those events that pull in folks that otherwise would not walk into town hall if you paid them, or have any real trust in things that are going on at a government level, how can they get involved? And I really liked what you said about creating events which are, you know, which engage, but then the question there is how do you get more diversity and other folks showing up at those events? And it really seems to me to like need a network of folks who are helping you do that. And they don't necessarily, I mean, not necessarily people who are employed by the town, but is there any possible way of giving people stipends to help with the process of networking, of reaching out, making contact? Because it seems like that's going to be really necessary if it's going to go. You can only do so much, Jennifer, and I know there are others who help, but it's really a lot of
No,
work.
I've had this notion that hasn't got, or this idea that hasn't quite gotten picked up for various reasons of like all of the communities have like the grandmother or the mother of the community, right?
Right.
And if we can
Yeah.
connect with those individuals through stipend or whatever, because those are the people who people say things like, oh man, I went to town hall today and A, B, and C happened, right? And
Right.
then that's the person, and then we can get that feedback. That's a beautiful thing right there. And that will help us to make a lot of change, because we're changing it from the word of the folks. Like, we don't know how to change it, and we shouldn't be making any changes without the input from everyone else, right? I mean, that's not
Hmm.
that's not helpful. So I've had that theory, and one day it'll happen, I hope, um, that the town invests in that. It's,
Yeah.
you have to
If
invest in it some way if you're really going to make that change. And
yeah,
so,
I mean, it's really to recognize that government, in its official description and work and process, mm, doesn't doesn't do this, or it needs to have other mechanisms to be able to do that, reaching out to those who otherwise, um, for lots of reasons, can't or won't be able to be on boards or committees or commissions and whatnot. But there's lots they can do, and I think the Survival Center is a great example of that. How many volunteers there are, how much of a network that has created. Is it possible not for the town, recognizing the importance of doing this, to
so
anyway, the league, I can't speak for the league, but I'm sure we'd be of whatever help we could be in doing that.
I mean, I think that for a social service agency, the one thing that makes the survival center so successful, at least from the participant view, is that there's really no questions asked, right? Like, I remember needing assistance and going to the DTA office and having to go through the process of applying for what is a basic need, right? A little bit of money and a little bit of food stamps, and feeling like the woman is really acting like it's coming out of her paycheck. Like, there's this resistance, probably because she's been burnt, right? So the nice thing about the survival center is you can walk in there and say what town you're from and be treated with dignity and respect and get some great food. I mean, that is the benefit there. And how we change that into a local government, I'm not 100% sure, but it is a good way to think about it now that we've had this conversation. So um to think about moving forward is, and that's how the center itself becomes, that's their first way of lowering the barrier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is like reducing the amount of questions, and that become humiliating when you have to answer the same questions for WIC, for food stamps, for mass health, for all of the different for housing. It's all the different social agencies that help, and you have to go through that process of answering and giving what seems to be like your life story and keeping all of those pay stubs. And the center really just doesn't do any of that, which makes it so much more welcoming and inclusive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Marcy?
Hi, so I don't know if this is getting a little off topic, but somehow I feel like it's related. And if it's not possible for you to share about it because it's not appropriate for some reason, please, that's totally fine. But I wondered if you could share with us anything about this visioning process that's going on. Because it seems to me that this is an attempt to get people in town, and I don't know how they came about. Well, even where you're at, have they? I know the trainings happened for facilitators, but like the idea of it in my mind was that it was a visioning of not just the DEI department, but for the whole town government, what people wanted to see happening. So could you just speak a little bit about where that's at and
Yeah.
what you think about it?
So
Thank you.
that's another example of having an event during holidays that we were, got a little bit of resistance back from, but we had so the CSWG had suggested that we have uh I don't I'm so sorry, a visioning where racial healing, right? And so it was like train the trainers, so train the peers, train the community members to go and speak to other community members in forums to help find out what are the problems. Why don't people trust? Why don't they want to come through the doors? And and receiving all of that information so that we can lower those barriers. Sometimes the problem, I think, with those things are that, like, the people receiving that information, sometimes, again, this is where ego comes in, not limited to the town, but just we're people, right? And so um people get offset by that sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Right. And n- I think one of the most outrageous, and I don't know if Brianna's still on here or not, I don't see her, but one of the most, I think, and when I say outrageous, I don't mean it in a bad way, but there was a meeting where the CSWG was invited to the town council to talk about their report, and they were on screen because we know town council meetings, you don't see the audience, but you see the panelists. So they were panelists, but the town council directed all of their questions to Paul, right? And and somewhere in the midst of that, Brianna Owens, her courageousness, decided to say that is the definition of what you're doing right now, is the definition of white supremacy. It just really is, right? We're sitting right here. You're not acknowledging us. You're not asking us the questions so that we can give you the correct answers. And I think the way that it was received was, I'm not racist, right? And I understand that too, because of it was publicly done. It wasn't done in this way where it was like, hey, by the way, but and it was just, nobody would have anticipated that in a council meeting, right? And so what Brianna was really saying, or from my perspective, I'll say what she was saying was that where what was happening was the town has a process, and this is the way that it's always been done, and there is room for improvement in that process, right? Like, the time has come where it's no longer acceptable to have us in a room and direct your questions not at us but to someone else. And so maybe what needed to happen is the way that they proceed with those meetings happen. And so they did do that with one of the CSSJC meetings when Michelle Miller ended up facilitating it, right? Because the way it was set up was the CSSJC had invited town council, and somehow in the process of me getting ready to post the meeting, I found out that it was a council meeting, and then the CSSJC was coming to that. And I was like, well, that doesn't feel right, And I think the members at the CSSJC at that point were just feeling like we can't, like, every time we turn around there's like an uphill battle, right? And that's understandable of how they felt like that. So they didn't really know how to put their energy into it. And it was like, I was just basically told the clerk of the council, like, you're going to have someone else come in and run that meeting, or it's going to have to be run in a different way, because what you're telling the community, which I don't think is what you think you're doing, but what you're telling the community is that we were invited to a meeting and now it's our meeting, right? That's not what was supposed to happen, right? It's the CSSJC's meeting and you're invited to it. And so Michelle Miller ended up facilitating it, and she did a fantastic job, and it was a very good meeting. But it's all of those things right there, like, and it's keeping systemic racism alive, and we just don't even realize it. And
Yeah.
you have to, and I understand. So I just want to back up and say, like, as a community member, those folks who are very vocal in a way that seems off-putting, I understand where they're coming from, because for years they've come and said in a polite and nice, calming way, like, here are the issues, and nobody really took them and did anything about it, right? And so after a while, people just get frustrated. Now, I mean, at the end of the meeting, do I feel a little bit some kind of way? Yes, because I'm only the messenger and I'm getting yelled at during the meeting for it. But I understand where that comes from, right? Because they've tried to come and talk and they're done talking, right? And so then the question is, how do you get everyone to come to the table when the energy is so high? It's like, if everybody just takes a deep breath and relax and leave your egos outside of the door and come in with an intent to, like, really want to move forward, I think that we can. I don't even
I,
know if I answered anything. I just went off on
well,
a
No, that's okay. Can I do a follow-up, Jeff?
Yes.
Hang on for me. So the thing that Barbara Love is doing,
Mm-hmm.
is that happening? Is that in process?
So it's still in process. You know, it's hard. It's holiday time and everyone's
Oh,
schedules are
sure.
really busy. So the trainers happened. We're going to do a third train the trainer, which might end up, you know, playing out on with the National Day of Racial Healing. I'm not quite sure. We don't have all of that squared away yet or tied into the National Day of Racial Healing. But really, there's one more training to be done with the community members, because it's, you know, if you don't facilitate, it's hard, because these are hard topics, and you have to be ready for anything. You have to be ready for an individual who might cry, or for an individual who is
Right.
argumentative with another one. And so you really have to know how to control. And for people who don't do that, it can be really intimidating.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Thanks.
did I get to it now, Marcy? Okay.
Go, Jeff?
Yeah, thanks. Even though, Jennifer, even though you felt like you just went off on a tangent, I actually thought that what you said was spot on about process. And I'm particularly, well, this is one I was going to ask, but I think in light of what Ash said before, I think this is part of what our community needs desperately, is this ability to sit down together and have a discourse which is both respectful but also involves very serious listening,
Mhm.
where we work hard to understand the other's narrative, and there's too little of that, and too much, in my mind, politicking going on, in which it's kind of more important for me to be right than to listen to you, so to speak. And I, and so I'm really glad you said what you said. What I was going to ask you is if you could just point to the other initiatives besides the visioning process that are either on the back burner or bubbling around, in terms of what DEI is doing.
Mhm. So we do have the events. We're also still continuing to provide training and workshops for town staff. So that
Okay.
is, we have gone through every department in town, and by at the end of October, we had gone through each department. And and I have a little bit of concerns there, because like if we have to wait a full circle to go back to each department, then I feel like stuff gets kind of lost in that time frame. So
Right.
we do have been looking to work with other people who would like to who are facilitators, to come in and hold workshops. So we had Amherst College come in and do a supervision with the DEI lens training. That was wonderful. It was well attended. Um, and so we're looking for other ways for that to be supportive. Honestly, I think it would be really beneficial to have just a full equity audit done for the town. I mean, I think any institution or organization would never go wrong with having an equity audit. And I think, to speak to the piece before that you spoke about, Jeff, is often it's not even that people don't want to listen, it's that they get so defensive and they feel like you're calling me a racist, right? And that is like the part about, and I think Oprah did an interview with someone where they talked about compassionate listening. You just need to listen, right? And there is that part of like that narrative, like that can't be the real narrative, because we remember when the community safety working group first came out and said, like, people's experience with the police department, the BIPOC community, or I would say the global majority individuals, have a different relationship, and it was not received well by lots of people. People were like, oh, you're in denial, you're in denial, or that doesn't happen here, but it does, right? And so that piece of it, people just need to listen and accept it. and not be on defense about it, right? And so the person who's also explaining it, while they might be passionate about it too, also need to keep in mind, like, if you come with your guns blazing, you're gonna put them on defense automatically. So it has to be a clear understanding from both entities or both individuals or both parties that we're coming in neutral to get work actually done, right? We're not here to put, like, usually when I start a workshop and I just start it off and be like, I'm not here to call anybody racist. I'm not here to put blame on anybody. I'm here to show you that there are stuff that has happened purposefully that have created these different, you can call them narratives if you would like to, for different people, right? And it's hard for people to just actually sit and listen to that. It really is.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. And I think um yeah, I think that's a hard one for folks.
I totally agree, and it, but you know, that's the work that needs to be done if we're going to move towards a more equitable and democratic community. It's precisely building those bridges and doing the hard listening and the hard reflecting that is the work. And it's tough stuff.
Yeah.
It's very tough stuff.
And I think that there are trust issues too. I mean, I think
Big time.
when you think about it, and I would use the July 5th as an example. It's just, that to me seems like there could have been, I think people often, and I won't, maybe don't need to use the July 5th incident. I think that people often look for answers or guidance to something from us, and sometimes because leadership wants to be as neutral as possible, they say very little or not enough or nothing at all. And when we do that, it causes more questions, right? And so all of those things are ways that we can start to rebuild trust. I feel, like, why do we have to wait for something to explode when there's all of these warning signs to handle it? That's another way. And then when we handle it, why are there so many blanks, right? And so I think that is a big piece of the trust issue for a lot of folks, right? It's like, I don't know that I can trust you because you can't even tell me that you care about me, right? Like, how can I trust if you can't tell me that you even care about me? And when you, now I'm going to talk about the July 5th incident, but when you think about that, like, it's so insane because the two parties were really, it was like the community who was outraged, and then it was the police that were outraged. And the police weren't outraged necessarily at the community. They were outraged because they didn't feel like anybody had their back, and the community felt like, we don't feel like you have our back," right? Because there was like this silence. And that was really a great opportunity for the community to kind of come together and an understanding of, like, hey, we value our community, we value our youth, and hey, we value our public safety department, right? And you don't have to take a side and you don't have to do anything, but that is very simple and it's still very neutral. um and we just don't always get that. We just don't always get that,
Yeah.
which is really too bad.
I just want to say one more thing about what you're talking about right now, which is communication is the key.
Mhm.
And, I think that generally there's so much hesitancy to say the S word, like, sorry, this happened. Sorry you felt that way. Sorry we messed up, whatever it is, because of litigation and all of these things that are not human. But like, so much of that incident could have been avoided, as you say, on both sides, because of that lack of communication from the leadership, out the gate. And so then everybody's building their narrative about how
And that's
they're
the problem.
mistreated. Yeah.
When people have the ability or given the opportunity to build their own narrative, it can be very damaging. I mean, that is the piece, that is the consequence for not giving a narrative, right? Is that
Right.
people build their own. And
Right.
that's another way that we lose a lot of trust. or that people lose trust because they just don't feel cared for or protected or like they even matter for that for that.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to ask about just so we can at least point it out before we get to the end. You mentioned the resident oversight board, and I'm just that it concerns me. It's been over a year in terms of that. Not that there's a deadline, but I just would like to know is what's going on with that, because every time we ask a question, it gets vague, and then people are like, we're not sure what's going on. It's not as complicated as people make it in this place, okay? I love people here. I love the fact that people let people, cars in and stop for pedestrians. I feel like I'm in the right place now. New York hated me for that because I used to do that. But the thing that bothers me is that people are almost afraid to talk, afraid to venture, to do, because that would be one of the best things that could happen. That's how you pull people in the community into helping. And if you get other people involved, it often changes the whole dynamic. And I'm just curious, every time we mention it to anybody, it's almost like we're working on it, and I don't mean it can be, we snap our fingers and everything will be there, but that's part of the concerns that I've heard from people in different, areas.
Yeah. So
you can comment on that. I'd appreciate it.
interesting enough, in the CSWG report, there's a layout from, I believe, 7th generation, and I will just pay tribute to Dr. Demetria Shabazz, because she was the co-founder of 7th generation, and she was our social justice warrior. But the resident so anyways, in the report, there is a process laid out of, having an outside party come in and kind of move it. So there was a bid that was put out, and only, because of the way our process works, right? A bid itself can take up to 3, 4, 6 weeks. So that's wasted time right there. First and drafting and crafting it is a whole other story. So in theory, that could be like 2 months right there. But the bid that went out, there was one response, and they were asking probably for 2 or 3 times the amount of budget that we had for it. And so then it became, how do we put out a bid that is going to meet the requirements for us to get this done? And so we had to kind of change it and went through different processes. And so now we have one consultant right now, and at the very beginning stage of getting the community feedback from the experiences that people have had with the police department, because that is where the report starts with the first, step is the community outreach. And so that's where they are now. And it doesn't, again, and sometimes I have to say, that's one of those things where the community is looking at us like this, and we're going like, I don't know why it takes so long, but it does. It just does. And so, and often people will say, well, you don't have the priorities, but things happen so quick and are so I don't even know how to, like, I can't explain some of the nuances and process of the town to do things like a bid. Nothing is done overnight with the town. So that is like probably the best answer that I can give you. Is it became a bigger process than we had anticipated. We anticipated we could put out a bid. We anticipated that we would get more than one response to the bid, and that didn't happen. So then we had to recraft it.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Because didn't the CSWG kind of lay out a whole scenario? Like, what was the purpose of having a consultant and, to create an ROB
so I
template?
Well, it wasn't just the template, it's the whole thing. And I'm pretty sure that is what the CSW, that seventh generation had recommended that happen, is that somebody comes in and starts it. Because one of the things that happens sometimes is you don't want someone who doesn't know to craft who doesn't really understand the process and what needs to happen to craft their charge. That's how we end up with a charge. And then it's over, the expectations, or it's over the head, and then it can't be managed. The group can't be, it's just a million different little things can go wrong if
Mhm.
the charge is crafted wrong, right? Can't really speak on the people who come in, but that general charge, people, you give someone the charge and that's what they move with. That's like their mission of their committee. And so, people can go back and forth on whether or not it was full representation of whether, I think the seventh gen had interviewed 50 people, right? That's 50 people out of a town that without the students is at like what, 15,000, or maybe we're at 20,000 now, right? So you need a full reflection, because if without it, it needs to be more even. So while I understand like the resident oversight board needs to have a point of view from all perspectives. Like for me, I try to think of, when things happen, I try to think of things in the most holistic way possible, right? So that I have like a full understanding, even if I have to reach out to different people. You kind of, with the resident oversight board, you're going to need that, because without it, somebody's going to have something. Well, I don't know, it's Amherst, somebody always has something to say, honestly, but the chance of it being more to say is more likely, right? And then it needs to be done and crafted in a way where you don't have to worry about it failing, because like look at Crest, it was like my baby too, because I helped them go through that guidance, and it's a pilot program, so it is going to go up and down, right? It's pilot, it's new, nobody's done it, there's no blueprint. But for everything that goes wrong comes a group of people who are going to say, see, I told you, right?
Mhm.
And you try to minimize that as much as possible, right?
Mhm.
That's probably how I can answer that the best.
That makes sense.
The only thing that I think about stuff like that is that in order to implement things, you have to make mistakes, and you have to be more open with the public, not about everything, because there's some things you just cannot discuss, whatever. But my concern was trying to get it right. You then created not you personally, but the town created a distrust because of the many things. And I've only been here like 12 years, and I have seen more notebooks made of beautiful little ideas and whatever, and then put on a shelf. Okay. I've seen at least 5. So when you do that, and I understand there's it's monetary, it's procedure, there's the open meeting laws, there are a lot of things, but I mean, I helped to write the municipal housing trust. Did I know anything about a municipal housing trust? Heck no. It was Judy Brooks, God bless her soul, who pushed me to go on the Housing and Shelter Committee. I took a year and a half to actually understand what the heck it was by interviewing people, reading, and we wrote. It was 3 of us, Nancy Greggs, may she rest in peace, Greg Stutzman, and myself. And none of us really knew a lot. But the point is, you have to, not you, and I'm not talking about you with this, but I'm saying the town has to realize that there's a process that happens, and I was talking with someone because of, I live in South Hadley now, and I have never seen such kind police in my whole life toward various things that have happened. I said, and I had some people visiting that were helping me with a crisis, and they were saying to me, those are the South Hadley police? I said, yes, and it's like very typical. Then a person told me the other night, I was at an event, and they said they had a person commit suicide, a child that was from a foreign country that was in the high school and what have you. And it was because of the way it was handled or whatever. And they went into a training. And I said, wow, I didn't even know that part of it. But we had had 4 or 5 or 6 incidents, and every single person acted very similarly in a good way, to the point where I was almost in tears, and I go and tell them all the time, thank you. You need to hear it from a Black person that lives in your town, because I see Trump signs, I get nervous, but I see that you have trained your people, Now, I don't know how they were, but 1 or 2 of them told me they've always done this. And I said, I don't think that's quite true, but anyway. But what I'm saying is sometimes we have to try a few things. We have to go a little bit. You don't have to do the whole board. Just get a few people, and then you can get a consultant. Sometimes you can over consult. I'm from New York, the home of consultants. Okay, over consult. That's why affirmative action never worked, because they kept over consulting. So it's just a thought. Just my little 2 cents.
Yeah,
And
no, I think there's a lot to be said there, and yeah.
Yeah,
No, I appreciate that. I will,
it's
yeah.
just a thought. Just start small.
I'm always 50-50 with consultants, is what I will say, right? Because my first thought of consultants is you're gonna pay someone umpteen hundreds or thousands of dollars to tell us what we already know, but they've just put it in a nice, package, right? That's the first thought. Although I really think I'm probably in the wrong business, because I should be a consultant, so I don't know how that really works. And the other piece of it is too, is like, sometimes you're right. Sometimes you just need to go and ask and talk to people, right? You don't need to hire someone to do that, but you need to go and ask. And I think that often the town feels like they're in this position where they don't want to be looked at as the wrong. And again, sometimes it just has to do with ego and other things. If the town can have an ego, right?
No, yeah, I
But
know. I should.
but I think that that's where it often comes from as well too, right? It's more about, we're trying too hard to be Switzerland. Like, you can't always, if you're going to be, there's a way that you can be Switzerland versus not being just blatantly nothing. And consultants, again, yeah, I'm back and forth with the whole consultant thing. I can't figure out how I really feel about them.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
Be
I
careful.
want to be one.
Be careful, Jennifer. Probably half of us here have consulted and been consultants in our lives. May I jump in for a minute? My computer power died just as someone was asking a question about the resident oversight board. May I go back there a moment? I'd like to tie it into a word we've used, community, another word we've used, communication, and to focus in on the resident advisory board. We've heard nothing. And in a town that is complaint driven, and in the business you're in, Jennifer, that's community communication and outreach. Yeah, another idea. I know ideas are cheap, but it seems to me we regularly hear from the legislative body of this town. Now, the resident advisory board, unless I'm incorrect, is squarely in the hands of the town manager and his office. Yet we don't get updates, and unless it's the monthly, very long town manager's report. But when I go back to the point that in town, we are complaint driven. And when we hear complaints about what's happened to the resident advisory board, why haven't we moved on? It's because we've heard nothing. Regular updates would be very helpful in many things that are under the town manager's responsibility. And since you are a member of the town manager's office, I just pass that along to you. I thank the person who asked about the resident advisory board, because we've been promised that. I know the RFPs have been unsuccessful, and that's not a business I know anything about. But my goal as a community member is I want to be informed. I don't like complaint-driven responses because they're not productive. They're very frustrating for residents, for the action groups that are out there. So I just pass that along. We need to get updates when it's under the purview of the town manager and certainly resident advisory board. We've been waiting now for 2 years, perhaps 3, and we don't
No.
know what's happening.
I think I mean, I think we've kind of touched on this pretty consistently throughout this whole entire time, is that it is communication. When the community doesn't know, they have the opportunity and time to write their own narrative. And that is that the town doesn't want to do it. It doesn't want to do it because of this A, B, or C. And whether or not that's true or not, I can't always answer that, or I shouldn't always answer that. But what I will say is that, similar, like one of the things that I was really happy that Paul finally did was just announce that he wasn't going to defund the police. It was like 2 or 3 years after the CSWG talking about defunding the police. And it's not necessarily anything to do with how I view or think about the police, but also because when you don't tell people that you are or aren't, then it gives everybody the expectation or hope that it's a possibility that you will or won't. And then again, that boils down to the lack of trust that we run into often. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. And it just comes back to communication. And we can't just always be so scared. I mean, somebody's going to have something to say anyways. You might as well say something, right? So I think there's like 2 more little things that I want to say quickly. One is I just want to talk about, because part of this is about boards and committees, and I just wanted to talk about one of the things that I realized with the Community Safety Working Group and with the AHRA and CSSJC tried to eliminate is, we are taking people who are everyday people who don't understand how local government are coming in. And it's really about the resources and the tools that we give them. So where we failed the CSWG was not providing them with the full understanding of how the budget process worked, right? And so I try really hard to have the finance director or a person from finance come, especially when the CSSJC and AHRA first started, to go through the budget and what the time frames are. Because what ended up with the happening with the CSWG was, by the time they were ready to make their recommendations, the budget season had already begun and we were getting ready to finalize the budget, and they weren't able. And I don't think that was done necessarily purposeful. Budget time is happens, and it's hard and it's fast and it's intense, but we didn't give them the tools that they needed so that they could be successful. And so I think us providing the tools to the boards and committees is extremely important. I think that all of the boards and committees should have a DEI training, right? Because you are making decisions for the most vulnerable people in the town, or the most underrepresented and underserved. And then 2, we also need to educate them ourselves, in the sense that of having a full understanding of how the budget works, having somewhat of an understanding of how local government works, and then also understanding the open meeting law and the open meeting law, because that one, that provides a lot of barriers too, but I think that's a little bit above and beyond the scope that what we can do. But maybe if all the towns were able to get together and bring, or even to our state representative, like, this is why this doesn't work, is because it's a barrier for so many people, right? I think that is really important. And then finally, and maybe kind of end towards using this, is I had watched a TED Talk, and I believe the woman's name was Paloma Medina, and she walked out in this TED Talk and said, "I'm done talking about diversity. We're not going to talk about diversity anymore." And everybody in the audience kind of was like, "What? We don't have to." And a couple people were like, "Yeah," and which was a little bit scary. But her point being is that if we strive for equity, diversity and inclusion happen organically. And I think that we also need to kind of think about that and really move more towards equity, as opposed to diversity, because we're already diverse. And actually, we are a diverse group right here. There's many different things that are between all of us that are different that make us a diverse being, but we're at the same time not diverse at all, right? So it's really important, I think, that the town really work to striving on with equity, what makes things equitable. And then the other things that we're striving for, like inclusion and diversity, will happen organically. And that's my mic drop. Boom.
I have an emoji like that has a. Does anybody else have a question or we haven't finished, we're not gonna ever finish talking to Jennifer. She was like one of our first Judy Brooks people. So, because there's so much to learn, but the town has to recognize that we can all learn it together. I mean, when somebody told me something like, you're gonna be working on a municipal housing, I said, what the heck is that? Okay, so again, and there's a time schedule and there's, and people can do things, but it's too late now to ask this question, but I want you to think about it. A lot of people have asked me and how do they pick people to go into various committees? And that would be something that we would like to maybe explore one day. How are people chosen, that apply for the committee, because it's done, I think it was at least that was a long time ago by the town manager, but
It still falls under the purview of the town manager. And for the most part, I would say the majority of the people who apply to be on a board or committee are accepted onto either that board or another board. I see you shaking your head, Marcy, but when you think about the bigger picture, there's a lot of people who apply. And
Yeah,
so a
I
lot of
just
them
know,
do.
I just know anecdotally people who would have been fabulous, but might have had a little bit of a different slant on the topic, who were not chosen. And again, it's the question of the narrative, like why was that person not chosen? And it's bordering on a personnel question almost, it's somewhat confidential, but the things you hear about, well, that person wasn't chosen because they have a different opinion or that they're not in the hand,
That should
I
never
mean,
be an answer. I would say that it is equally, when you apply for a job, it's competitive, right?
yeah, but for a volunteer position on a committee in a town where participation needs to be encouraged, and especially with the loss of town meeting, there's just so much less of a way to participate. And so for folks who are trying to, and then they get rejected, it's tricky,
No, but somebody
it
had
is.
to be appointed. And so sometimes I could say, I can't
Right.
always speak because I'm not on all of them, but it can be competitive. I mean, equally
Yeah.
as it is when you're applying for a job, people
Yeah.
are picked for different reasons. And I just sit on the ones that for the committees that we staff. So it's kind of hard to speak on that, but
Yeah.
Oh, that question's been
Anyway.
around since even before you started.
I know,
Yeah.
I know.
So,
Well,
so I mean, it's not Paul necessarily. It's not, I mean, I'm saying, and I had that question. I don't even know how I got chosen. I was like, I didn't know anything about this, but again, it was one of those things and I worked hard, but I could have been just the opposite, I'm just saying, I don't know that it's not like a job thing, because
yeah, and
I
what I
worked
would
outside of teaching in the corporate world too, and it's not the same, not
what
at
I
all.
would well, I mean, again, it's competitive. You've got one available position and you got 4 people who apply for it, right? There's multiple people who aren't gonna be appointed. But what I was gonna say too is the nice thing about boards or committees, you have a little bit more time. And I know on town council, if you get voted in, you get more time, but it really seems like when you're taking people who are everyday community members, and they're now becoming council people. It's the town government is so complex that by the time their 2 years is up, they've just kind of gotten their first real foot in the door of understanding how local government works. And so that's another way where I think like maybe that should be extended more than a little bit of 2 years. I understand the notion of so you don't have the same people all the time making the rule. Well, there's a lot of nuance in that statement too, but it just takes a long time. I've been with the town for 10 years. And what I'll say about working for municipality, and I always say this, it's my go-to, is it's a lifetime of learning because every day you learn something new. And it just, whether it's, within your department, within another department, another way that the accounting department is going to tell me I can't do something, there's always something that you're learning there. And things don't change that fast either. And so that's another problem. And then I think it was Adrian who spoke about, I think again, communication is the key. So, and another great example of the process and needing to be changed is when the CSSJC and the HRC all fell under quorum. Now, from the communities, and this is the thing about perspective, and this is why I think people need to think about things holistically when they're making change is, and ask somebody every once in a while too. But so those two groups fell under quorum, and these are the 2 out of 3 committees that are the majority of them are of people of color or the global majority, right? And so the perspective looks like you just let us fall under quorum. So now we can't do anything. You didn't want to hear our voices. So now you silenced us by making it so that we don't meet a quorum. Interesting enough, little do they know that happens every year, right? Maybe not with their board or committee, but it is almost guaranteed to happen every year because of, people term on June 30th. So it could be, and then the town manager doesn't start reappointing people until closer to June. So it could be said that that process itself needs to be reevaluated, right? And as opposed to keeping it the status quo or what we've always done, right? Because that would create, and it would also stop that odd perspective of you're trying to silence us. And by no means do I think that that was what was being done to the CSSJC, but I understand why they feel that way because the optics of it or the perspective from the outside looks very different than the perspective from the inside. And there's a simple solution to it. And it's like, got to just change that process.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
who was next?
Shall
Rebecca.
Ash,
Yeah.
and then Rebecca. Okay.
Yeah. Just first, I really like the emphasis you placed right at the beginning of your talk on the town is going through a change, a significant change. And a perspective on that is, well, there are immediate things that need rectification and need action. For example, better training of those who are coming into committees and the council. Irv Rhodes, I always loved his vision about we need a training institute, but we need something to help because new folks are going to come in, help that change, but they need to understand all the issues that are involved. So that's a really important point that you make. The other thing is it's really important to understand that this has got to be it's just the town is going through a change, but it's just beginning. It's a long-term it's a long-term process. That doesn't mean that you can put off stuff that needs to happen. It's just that the perspective has to be, hey, it took 400 years to get us here. It's got to be, it's going to take a while but the whole emphasis of building community as a part of it is absolutely essential to get more, frankly, white folks to understand why and what this is about. And I think that larger education isn't really the responsibility of the town government, but it is, I mean, efforts like the Stolen Beam and others are really important, as well as the events that you plan. Anyway, just a perspective that
And I think that goes back to communication though, right?
Yeah.
Because if people understand why it's taking so long, then that's different. But when they hear crickets or nothing, or they feel like they're it's being stalled. And so communication is very,
Really
very
important.
key
Yeah.
to the way things.
Any-
And I also am beginning to realize that a municipality should always be changing, right? Because the world is always changing. Otherwise, it stays stagnant, and that's how you fall into the. But that's not how we used to do it. I mean, the entire first floor has new faces in it, right? Because we had folks and love them to death who were there 35, 45 years working in there, right? And so when people are starting to transition to retirement and new people are coming in, the new people come in with these new ideas and the older folks are looking at them like,
Whoa.
but that's not how we used to do it, right? And so it needs to always be changing as the world always changes. Otherwise, we'll become stuck, which
Yeah.
some might
So
say
that's
we are
just
now.
such an important perspective to have, so that you have persistence, because that's one of the essentials. Anyway,
If I could move it faster,
Okay.
I would,
All
but I
right,
can't.
Rebecca?
enough.
Yeah, Rebecca?
Thank you, Jennifer. So maybe this is a good kind of last question. I don't know, we're probably out of time.
Yeah.
What can the League of Women Voters of Amherst and the local area do to support your work and your department's work?
I think that I always feel that you guys are in support of the work that I'm doing. I think just by the nature of who you guys are as individuals and as an entity. But we should collaborate more. I mean, I would love to do something. We're coming up to a presidential election, and I would love for either to work with you guys more in getting out into the different communities to register folks to vote, or to let them at least educate them on why it's so important. You know, again, outreach, I think there's so many already existing programs and organizations that are doing such good work that we could kind of tailgate off of. Like, the Survival Center does the delivery program over at South Point, and or there's the mobile market where you can piggyback up, where you can tailgate off of. And there's just already the schools, the different places where you can go and be involved. And I know you guys are already in the school, but I would really like to do that because we're coming up to a big election, and this election is pretty important, considering that our who our candidates are, and people should really know that their vote matters, right? I think a lot of times people feel like, and that's a mistrust in the bigger government, is that their voice doesn't, or their matter, right? So why should I go and vote? My vote doesn't matter. But for everybody who says that, if they voted, that would be a change, right? So
Hey, before we wind up, I just want people, a few people have left, but I want you all to not leave completely as you exit. Please fill out the survey that we have at the end, because we have to report in to the state and federal part of the league. So we like to have the information. So just answer. It's only like 3 or 4 questions. It's not that and not involved. And you'll do us a big favor. We really appreciate that. Marcy, Rebecca, anybody
is
have
it in the
anything?
chat, or do I have to
Yeah,
fill it out?
when you go to leave, there's just going to be a survey. Just mark the survey, because we do it also. They'll ask you like 4 or 5 questions. They're very simple.
I think I would like to use that for other boards and committee stuff. That's a really kind of cool way to get some feedback from community members who might not speak up during a board or committee meeting.
If you want any, I can send you the survey questions or whatever. If you need any, if you can't get it from just looking at the survey when you fill it out.
I think it's more of a tech question. How do you attach the survey to the?
It's part of Zoom. So I can
Things
tell
they don't
you how
tell
to
you.
do it. I can, it's in the depth of when you put together a meeting, you have different titles like registration, survey, different things, so that you see it up there.
I think I understand. Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Thank you
And
guys all.
everybody, and don't forget, thank you very much, Jennifer. You have been, as always, very informative. It's been very nice to hear. And the fact that you're there makes me feel a lot more secure and et cetera. Also, please, people, come to the party. I thought it was started at 2, so it shows you what I knew, Rebecca.
2:30.
2:30. I know they corrected me.
If you can, stop by the party.
It's at 2:30 on the 17th,
Sunday.
which is Sunday afternoon, at Applewood. Anyway.
Oh, they're doing the first Rob Community Forum is on December 17th at 1:00.
Okay, yeah. Well,
What is that, Rob?
the Resident Oversight Board.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know it well enough to call it Rob. Okay.
Robbie.
Okay, thank you all.
right,
And
thank
to all the people
you.
who came, don't forget to take the survey before you actually go, when you leave. And
Thank you,
thank you so much,
thank you.
Jennifer, always.
Jennifer, I hope we get a quick, at least notice that that's happening on Sunday. It's a point of information for the community, and certainly it can go out either on the town website or a blurb by Scott Mertzbach or Phyllis Lair. If you're still with us, I'm sure you would like to have it added to your very interesting weekly column in the Amherst Bulletin. Anyway, great thanks. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
So can I just
keep
respond
chugging.
to that quickly? It's on the community calendar. I'm going to announce it on the news and announcements, but we also did, it's gone to the school PGOs, and it has been put in places, like laundromats and other
Haven't
places.
seen
So
it.
it's amazing how much information doesn't cycle fully around
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
we've worked really hard on doing some outreach in that you don't know.
Wow.
One other
Incredible.
place
Yeah.
would be to put it in the Indy. The Amherst Indy,
I think he knows because we talked about it. He was at the
okay. He might
but
have,
I'll
but
double.
they're posting things all during the week now, not just on the weekend.
Okay.
Just
Oh,
another
sorry.
add to your long list of things to do. Communication, and you find each and every time, I'm certain that I pride myself on knowing what's going on in town. I hadn't read, hadn't heard, but I guess because I'm not privy to those places where you have already posted. So thank you for doing all that work. There's more to do, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, and thank you, Jennifer. This was wonderful.